Okay, here we go. This is Jeff Atwood, and I'm going to tell a story about the creation using the Bagua, Chinese Bagua, as the outline. This is a story I'm going to tell for fellow students at Atlantic Oriental Medicine, School of Oriental Medicine in Fort Lauderdale, but I'm also going to be using it for some other things like my Facebook group. It's Norse mythology and the warrior spirit. So what I'm first going to do is explain quickly the creation cycle in the 5 phases and the colors of pens that I'm going to use for each of those elements, because they're not exactly what they should be. It starts with metal, and I'm going to use black because metal is normally white. But on a whiteboard, white pen doesn't do so well. So metal is black. That's the condensing power that brings the vapor mist of heaven and brings it down to become water on a metal can, condensation. So the next phase after that is water. Typically, water is considered black, but it can also be blue, and so since black is being used, we're going to use blue for water. Water is the soul. The metal condenses spirit, the mist, into soul, water. And the water is life. All the water of the body, it's mostly water. It appears solid, but it's not. It's a sack of water. So this water gives rise to wood, which is representing the body in the sense of a tree, because we are humans made in the image of the tree. You have branches, you have the crown, you have roots, you have the earth at the waistline. And then the wood burns. That's exercise. So we heat up. When we heat up, we sweat. So this is fire. When we heat up and we sweat, that's why they say fire creates water. Or fire supports water. That's a deeper thing later on. After the fire burns the wood, and the wood turns to ash, and the ash becomes the earth. And we're using purple for the earth because normally it's yellow, and I don't have a yellow pen, and also yellow usually doesn't show up very well, so purple for earth. The earth then gives birth to metal, and we start all over. There is another type of beginning in the cosmological myths. It's a little more complicated to understand, so I'm not going to go with that for right now. But that gets into the different spirits and stuff, and I'll mention that as we go along in the story. But this is the color of the 5 elements that I'm going to be using, and it'll all come to understanding in a minute. So what we're going to do is we will talk about this story, which is the creation story, I think, of all humanity. It relates to all of the old world religions and many of the new world religions, and I'm going to suggest that it relates to all human religions that have ever been. What makes humans, modern humans like us, different from all the other humans, the ancient humans like Neanderthal and all of the other various creatures that became us as they interbred, what makes us different is a genetic change to be able to vocalize narration, like I'm doing now. We have tones, we have all these sounds that we can create words to express what's in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our observations. Neanderthal couldn't sustain long narrations. They could make a few words and grunts and sounds. They had the ability, but they didn't have the genetic ability to string it all together in a long narrative tale. What makes this so important for our species is that with this common paradigm, this one creation cycle, that paradigm is going to, it allowed humanity to survive in any environment on this entire globe. And in doing so, we were able to dominate every environment better than any of the other animals in the kingdom. Even other relatives like the Neanderthal. We were able to adapt, we were able to change along with the environments as we wandered. And we are the wandering ape, basically. We are the migratory ape that goes all over the world. So, this is, the picture is worth 1,000 words. So they say this story is the story without words, because it's all pictures. And my studies in religious studies and ancient philosophy and ancient mythology, I have found how the Bagua has space to validate and provide explanation for all the old world mythologies, from India to Iceland, Africa, Greece, Ireland, the Celts, the Slavs, the Germans, the Mongols, the Chinese, all of them. So, I'm going to get to it. So we begin in a state that the Chinese call wuqi. Wuqi is no pole, literally. But the pole refers to a single thing that is so long that the two ends of the pole become yin and yang. They're the polar opposites, like the North Pole and South Pole, the positive and negative of a magnet. So that is the no pole that becomes the Daichi, the great pole. So from nothing to everything. That's the magic of creation. We're going to fill in the space in between. So wuqi, no pole, in Sanskrit is called nirguna, nirguna Brahma. So no quality God. It becomes saguna Brahma, with quality God, after it becomes manifested into material existence. So before material existence, there was an immaterial state that really no word can reach, because every word is created from human consciousness in a material experience. So this is why I think Hebrew is called Ain or Ayin. It means limitless. Shunyat in a lot of Buddhist terms, it means limitless. It's limitless space. There's no limit. But there's still space. Empty space. Empty space is still something that is empty. So nothing is still something, because we call it nothing. And nothing is a word, which makes it something. So this is why there's a confusion. They say that the Romans and humans didn't have the concept of zero, which isn't true. They just had no reason to label a word to zero, because that true word, there is no word that explains nothingness properly. So we have a picture that describes nothingness. And it's a circle. And a circle is zero. So, this is nothing. That is something. The blank paper or the blank slate is nothing without a word. The purity of nothingness. This is now the first quality of nothingness, which is emptiness. This emptiness is considered Shiva. Shiva, like Shavasana in yoga, Shavasana is the corpse pose, asana pose. The corpse pose is to lay down, just like a corpse, have no thought, empty your thoughts, empty your emotions, empty your awareness of breathing, and just exist. So this Shiva state is actually dead sleep. In the state of dead sleep, you have complete unconscious mind. That's the perfect meditator, who has no thoughts, no feelings, no even sense of self. So dead sleep is the perfect time for the perfect meditation. But this dead sleep is considered empty, even though it's something sleeping like a corpse. So this something sleeping like a corpse, in the Bible, it says, in the beginning, the powers shaped heaven and earth. And the earth was void without form. Void without form. This is literally what chaos means in Greek. Chaos is something, but it's 100% potential energy. That 100% potential energy is constantly moving, never stays still. Stillness is what creates a form. So it's constantly moving. It moves towards a form, but then moves towards another form and moves towards another form and never actually takes any particular form. That's chaos. So when you're thinking, you want to have a thought, but then it always changes to another thought and you feel disconnected, that's chaos. That's the nature of chaos. Nothing. But it's still something. So in this dead sleep, this unconscious state, a spark of consciousness arises. This chaos is the mother of all. It's the perfect yin. Yin is the female, the receptive. It's empty, and being empty, it allows something to enter. That is consciousness that enters. Like a spark in a dark room that has no walls. The dark room that has no walls is limitless space. That spark is that one spark of consciousness, subconsciousness. It sparks, and just like if I'm in a dark room and something sparks on the other side, it's a flash, like a lighter, and it sends its light. I can see that. But in this situation, there's nothing to see it because there's no limit. So the source of the light never sees itself. So therefore, this subconscious state of mind, Chögyam Trungpa is my favorite Buddhist, he described the birth of the ego, which that's what this is. He described the birth of the ego as the first state is that you're dancing in a room without walls, complete freedom, no inhibitions. You know how they say, dance like nobody's watching. This is exactly the state of the subconscious. Now this spark, it expands, and in that expansion, Chögyam Trungpa says, you spin, and you spin, and you twirl, and you twirl, and you twirl, and you start gaining so much power and movement that you find some kind of bliss. And now you are limitless space, limitless light within limitless space. That's the next step. Limitless light within limitless space. This is called, in the Australian Aboriginal religion, the dream time. The Lakota religion, they said during the time of the first man, all forms were interchangeable. People shape-shifted. Animals shape-shifted. There was no solid, set thing. And that's the dream, because in a dream you have all these light pictures doing all these things, and you're not bound by physics. You can fly, you can walk in water and not have to breathe. You can do anything because there's no physical limit. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, well, you start having so much exuberance that it makes you have a subconscious sense of self. And that is a shock, because that subconscious sense of self makes your mind realize you don't know what you are, but you exist. So there's this gap of self-ignorance. And you don't recognize it as self-ignorance because it's still subconscious. You don't have an actual thought. You just have a feeling. And that feeling that you don't know you, but you exist, creates desire. And that desire is that gap of self-ignorance, desiring to know self. So that's the third step. You have the expansion, the limitless light, and then the darkness of self-ignorance, the gap of self-ignorance. So that gap causes that force that's going outward to fall back to the original point, looking for self-focus. So that self-focus becomes, the final state is the formulated conscious ego. This means you now have a subconscious desire to know self, but no physical experience of self to validate it. So I exist, I think, is sort of the confusion that's happening. So let me back up for a second and explain the state where the first verse of the Bible talks about the separation of heaven and earth. And the second verse qualifies the state of the earth. As well as, well actually, that's the second half of the first verse. So you have separation of heaven and earth and the qualified state of the earth. And then the second verse talks about the Ruach hovering over the deep. The Ruach is the Spirit of God hovering over the deep. So the first verse separates it, and the second verse leaves them separated. So it takes one verse to separate, and the second verse to solidify the separation. And then the third verse says, God said, let there be light. There's a gap between existing and then acting in the story of the Bible. This explains it. So you have the Ruach hovering above the deep is the state of what the Chinese call shun or sin. That is it means consciousness and spirit all at once. And that's the Ruach hovering above the deep being the empty body. This is 5 points because the shun of heaven becomes 5 spirits within the body. And this is where yoga is interesting because, as I said before, Shiva is the corpse, the empty corpse. Vishnu means pervader, and that's the Ruach, hovering above the deep. Brahma is the creator, that is Bereshit, the beginning. In the first word of the Bible, or the Torah, is expansion, the beginning of a cycle, which is expanding. The end of that cycle is to return. And that's where we get the ego, right? So we have the Shen hovering above the deep. Then we have this Yang coming up. That would be the fire of the Shen. Which is why one other cosmological view is that fire begins after the water. The fire comes out of the water. So that's a whole different level of understanding the 5 phases, not in this video. But this is the Qi cycle. This is the manifestation of Qi. Qi is energy. The reason this is the Qi cycle is because the Shen pervades the corpse, and that sparks energy. It's energy that does it all. Because potential energy, 100% potential energy, was the first state. And then it became kinetic energy as soon as the spirit pervaded the matter. However, this is explaining how the spirit separated from matter in the first place. So it's Qi that separated the mind from the body. Inherent, latent Qi, which is full 100% potential Qi becoming kinetic Qi in activity. And that's the spark of consciousness rising up as soon as the spirit enters the body. Now, everything the mind wants, the body works to provide. So the subconscious state, from unconscious to subconscious, the desire to know self, I said, returns back. And when it returns to the center, it enters that source of light. And it enters through the breath. So it's the first yin line. And that's the breath entering the nose. So we pour water into a cup. We pour from the top and it fills from the bottom up. Which means the water, even though it's flowing down, only really is noticed when it hits the bottom and fills up. So here's what happens. The breath enters the nose, condenses into water, and this is like the first breath of a baby being born. Spirit entering the body. And it condenses into what's called the soul, because the word soul means from the water. So from the breath entering the nose condenses like the kidneys, and then it creates in the mind a sense of solidity. It's a subconscious sense still, even though it's now awakening in the material existence. It's a subconscious sense because it's experiential and not analytical. And so that first sense of self being solid creates a heightened, blissful state of self-awareness without thinking. Just complete feeling. This is called the Jing cycle. Because the Jing is the essence. You have Qi, Shen, and Jing. Qi is the center of it all, holds it all together. But these are the 3 treasures. And they all work together. So as you see, you have the solid lines create yang on the left. The broken lines create yin on the right. So-called the two fish. Okay? This is why we call it from Wuqi to Tai Chi. Because here is the Tai Chi. The great pole is here. This is not a two-dimensional picture, even though I'm creating it in a two-dimensional variation. This is actually a three-dimensional picture, a sphere. Being a sphere, this is the pole, like the globe of the earth, the North Pole, South Pole, right there. That's the Tai Chi. This is why from Wuqi to Tai Chi is manifest the yin-yang symbol. So,